The Vincast, Australia's premier wine podcast, now has its first official sponsor or partner, and that is Different Drop, which, if you haven't heard of it, is kind of a new online wine retailer. A couple of guys in Sydney, passionate about unique and innovative wines from around Australia, from lots of different boutique producers, and in fact, a lot of previous guests of the show, including Brash Higgins, Unico Zello, Luke Lambert, you name it, you'll find it on the Different Drop website. They've got they're identifying lots of hard to get, artisan kind of wines, not the kind of wines you are likely to see a lot of at the big retailers. So if you want to find out more, I do suggest going to differentdrop.com and why not put together a mixed pack of interesting wines that appeal to you, or that you've been kind of dying to find, or even if there's something you specifically want they might not have, they might be able to source it for you, and they can ship it to you within a couple of days. When you are actually at checkout for your first purchase, if you put in the voucher code VINCASTVINO, then you will actually get a $25 discount off your first order over $100. So get in contact with you guys at differentdrop.com, and you can actually find them on Twitter as well at differentdrop, and help these guys and help the podcast. On episode 53 of the Vincast, I chat with Hunter Smith, the man behind Frankland Estate, the fantastic Riesling producer in the Frankland River region of Western Australia, and also the man behind Riesling Downunder. I also answer the first Ask the Wino question about off-dry Riesling in Australia, and I also talk about what your epiphany wines were and ask you another question at the end of the episode, so stay tuned. Hello there, Vincasters, and welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Guestbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and it has been a pretty awesome week. There was a great response to last week's episode with Tess Brown. Thank you very much for all those who listened and sent me feedback and told me that they've been enjoying the podcast. Of course, I always love getting feedback. And if you can spare some time, I would really appreciate you jumping onto the iTunes page for the Vincast or the podcast app on your iPhone, and for you to leave a rating and review, as it really does help me out in terms of getting feedback, but also in terms of growing the podcast. Now, you would have remembered from last week, I actually asked you what your epiphany wine was, the wine that's solidified you as a wine lover, or cemented your career path in the wine industry, if indeed you do work in the wine industry. And I've got a couple of responses. Oz Wine Guy on Twitter, otherwise known as Alex Russell, told me that it was the 1998 Darrenberg Football Shiraz which did it for him, because it was the first time that he could identify flavours and the specific McLaren Vale tannins, and it was quite an eye-opener for him. Georgie Davidson Brown also got in contact, and she told me that her wine was a 2009 William Fevre Premier Cru Chablis, which she enjoyed with some friends at the supper club here in Melbourne at about 2 o'clock in the morning. So I'm amazed that she could remember it. But she said that when she tasted it, she died a little inside. And Ben Knight, aka Ben and Wine on Twitter, just said that I dreamt of the taste of a wine. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I'm not sure if it means before he even tasted it, he dreamt of it. But thank you guys, obviously, for getting in contact. And of course, I've mentioned, I think before, the wine for me was the 1997 Yeringberg Pinot Noir from the Yarra Valley, which I enjoyed with my family at my sister's 21st birthday dinner at Ezard here in Melbourne. Now, I've also got my first Ask the Wino question. It was actually based on a picture of a wine that I Instagrammed during the week when I was over in WA recently. Caught up with a friend of the show, Old Mate Wine, who gave me a bottle of his off-dry Riesling, which came from the Frankland River in WA, and had about 33 grams of residual sugar and about 9 point something grams of TL, titratable acidity. So not sweet, not quite dry. It's somewhere in the middle. And Hugh Evans, obviously former guest and also follower of the show, asked what if there was a resurgence in off-dry Riesling in Australia. And I think it's not so much a resurgence as it's kind of got a bit of a following, but in my opinion, the sweeter Rieslings in the past were not quite off-dry. I'm not really sure. It's probably a little bit before my time, but the international brands of like Blue Nun, for example, I think came in a little bit sweeter, and then in reaction to people wanting dry styles, people went completely dry, and that kind of, and the association with sweet and Riesling kind of ruined it for Riesling for a long time. And so it's really interesting to sort of see the quality of just dry Rieslings improving. Lots more people drinking German and Austrian Rieslings and Rieslings from here in Australia, of course, but also people getting interested in the off-dry Rieslings. Now, of course, another wonderful producer of off-dry Rieslings and dry Rieslings as well is Frankland Estate, a producer in the Frankland River region of Western Australia. And coincidentally, my guest for this week's episode is Hunter Smith, whose family obviously established Frankland Estate. And so when I was over in WA, I caught up with him and we had a good chat about his particular part of the world and how much he loves Riesling enough to start the event for the Frankland Estate International Riesling Tasting, which is now Riesling Downunder. So I do hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll see you on the other side. Hunter, thank you very much for making some time to record an episode of the Vincast, and obviously thank you so much for your hospitality and welcoming me here up to beautiful Frankland River. It's quite cold, but it is a beautiful, beautiful day here today.
Yeah, thanks for coming by. It's always good to have someone from the other side of the country come past and say hello, so thanks for coming. It's, as you said yesterday, I think Isolation Ridge is a fairly apt name, and we always welcome people that make the effort, because it's not just around the corner, that's for sure.
But I do actually heartily recommend people make the trip, because it is a beautiful part of the world, and you I don't think you can truly appreciate it unless you come here and you find out what makes this place so special, particularly for the wines. But tell me, Hunter, I usually start each episode by asking my guest what the initial interaction with wine was that you remember, that you noticed something special in wine that made you want to that's what I want to do.
Yeah, it was a funny one, really. My father was a grape grower in South Australia, but he moved to Perth with his family, and my mother and father started broadacre farming, but he always, having grown up in the Riverland, he always had a love for wine, and really very much from my first memories were drinking Bordeaux and claret and various wines as a young child. That wine was always on the table, so I always remember it being conversational and very, very much part of a meal. And then probably our first experiences of being taken into wineries was, down at Goundry Wines, when they were a very small operation down in Denmark townside itself, and helping my father bottle by hand, 1 barrel of wine that he'd made. We did that for a number of years as small kids growing up. And then really, as we planted vines in the 80s and, the pruning and, all those sort of things as a teenager didn't appeal so greatly, and, just farm work, it was farm work. And
that's a pretty familiar story. I know, lots of second, third generation, probably more second generation, winemakers at some point kind of wanted to buck the trend and sort of say, no, I want to do something differently. This is not fun work.
Yeah, I mean, a good winter pruning usually sorts you out. Makes you want to think about all the other things in life that are possible. So I started working outside of the wine industry for a few years after leaving school, and then did a business degree and did other things, and travelled a little bit. But it was really probably through my travels internationally that I just found myself sort of being drawn towards wine regions, and got offered a job in a cellar, and away I went, and really, fell in love with wine again. So that was sort of what drew me back. Yeah.
So tell me about the travels that you did. That what was it that kind of appealed to you and made you connect with wine again?
Yeah, I mean, I was always, a fond drinker of wine, and obviously it was in our, very much part of our family business, so it wasn't a total disconnect over those sort of years. But I think, getting to Europe and just seeing how passionate those guys were, and how unique some of those sites were, and the combination of people and place was really fascinating, and I found it really alluring. And I suppose that was a little different to some of the more commercial operations you tended to see, bigger operations that you tend to see in Australia.
Was that particularly noticeable over here on the west?
Yeah, I mean, I think, across Australia, really, I think, they were boom times in a way in the wine industry, and we saw a lot of people, planting a lot of hectares and building their wine brands and businesses very quickly. And it was just very refreshing to get into Europe and see tiny estates making a good living out of doing something very passionate. And it wasn't so much about getting bigger, and bigger is better. And that really appealed to me, and I thought, that resonated in probably a business model that we could duplicate here at Frankland Estate.
And did you have the opportunity to sort of do some work in some of these estates over in Europe?
Yeah, so I ended up having done a few vintages now, but Salomon in Austria and Breuer and in Germany were really two memorable harvest visit or working visits, and vineyards, etc. around in some areas of France, and so it was pretty widespread, and I thought that was it was just good to see a global perspective over a few years of travelling.
Yeah, did you particularly enjoy the sort of the lifestyle of living and working over there, and the kind of the camaraderie of being part of the vintage team?
Oh yeah, I mean that's always appealing. I mean language was always a barrier. I struggle with English, let alone other languages. So
Again, I apologise for not bringing over my East Coast translator.
But we had a great time in the cellars, and with the Romanians or the Poles that were working in Europe in the vineyards, or the guys in the cellars themselves, and I just really loved probably a lot of those principals that headed up the business. They just had an amazing passion for what they were doing, and a deep sense of their land and how they did it. And I think agriculture's always been a big part of what I've done, whether it's vines or not, or wine or not. But I think that's what's really driven us as a winery towards organics and working with nature a lot more than we probably historically used to do, and just building that depth of knowledge has been a real draw card for me in the pursuit of wine. So
your father was a grape grower?
Well, my father's father was a grape grower, and he grew up on a vineyard in the Riverland, and so in the 1950s and late 1950s, a lot of Western Australia was only just starting to be opened up for agriculture, and there were some opportunities to move from South Australia. And my mother's family actually moved from New South Wales to Western Australia. And both, their families, they moved as quite young children, but both those families came over to Western Australia on the opportunity of opening up, farming land on the what they call the war service settlement blocks, and so they moved to Western Australia, and both sides of the family went off farming, and my parents grew up in Albany and Perth.
So, Albany's a bit of an isolated spot as well, down the coast. What sort of farming were they doing?
Yeah, they were a little out of Albany, but they were broadacre farming as well. But
can you explain what broadacre farming is?
Yeah, so typically wheat, sheep grazing, wheat and various cereals, barley production, and so my mother's side of the family still have a large property out out there, and they still farm sheep, fat lambs, and wheat and canola, barley, etc. So, yeah, so as you can see, through our family history, agriculture's been a strong part of it.
And the wine was more because of your grandfather, rather than, and that kind of appreciation of wine was through your father and then to you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's it's hard to sort of not be influenced by what your family does and how they enjoy life. And my parents have been very lucky. My parents have been very passionate about food and wine, and that's been largely self-taught by them. They've travelled a lot, and but my father's father really was a farmer, you'd say, producing grapes for one of the big companies in the Riverland. So he actually didn't really have a connection to wine itself as a finished product. He didn't make wine. He just simply produced grapes for one of the large wineries down the road. So yeah, but it's that influence that you get from that, and being a small, being quite young and sitting at the table and enjoying wine with your parents is, obviously not drinking so much, but, certainly as a conversational point, and the smells, and, being just introduced to it as a young age, it's hard to then not pursue something like that.
Well, actually, it's funny, last night, one of your daughters at the dinner table grabbed grabbed your glass of wine as you were away on a phone call, and I thought that she was about to just sort of identify all these amazing things, but then she says, "Smells like sweaty socks."
Yeah, no, there's some good one-liners that come out for sure. We've been working on her. It obviously needs a bit more refining, but no,
there's plenty of time for that.
Yeah, exactly, and but no, we're encouraging of them, smelling the wines, and even just sort of as we talk about the bottles of wine that are sitting on the table, you can tell that they're quite intrigued about what we're talking about, and I think that's it's a nice way to think about food and wine, and what it means to us as a culture. So yeah.
So growing up, as a farming family, did you, from an early age, get kind of an understanding and appreciation for, just in terms of food, knowing where it was coming from, and kind of making something from basically a raw material into a finished product?
Yeah, I think Mum and Dad, when you live out here, you have to have a pretty decent garden if you want to eat fresh, and they were big gardeners and still are, and so growing things and harvesting things, we were always every day after school, and we'd come home and you'd be going out to get the wood to light the fire, and go and get the strawberries from the strawberry patch, and go and get the peas from the garden, and picking pumpkins or digging up potatoes, and that was always very much a part of our life, and something that we're trying to encourage with our children as well.
And do you think that in some way influenced your decision to move towards organic farming here at Frankland Estate?
Oh yeah, I think, yeah, it's, I mean, it's such a accumulation of different things, but it to me it just made absolute sense. I mean, my parents were very much 90% of the way there with the style of farming they were doing, and we, when it came to vineyards, and we, it just makes sense. I think, there's no massive loss of production and quality from what we saw around the place, around the world. The people that were farming organically were making really exciting, very vibrant wines. And we just thought, well, let's, we're pretty much producing organically, so let's do the final steps and see what happens. And, I think it has become very exciting for us. And, the wine industry, I think everyone's well aware that's in the wine industry. It's been a pretty tough gig for the last sort of 5 to 10 years. But, for us, it's much more than that. We get a lot of pleasure and excitement out of, pushing ourselves with our knowledge and thirst for knowledge of, our soils and our microbiology in our soils and how that translates into the wines we're making. And, we're really excited about where we're heading. And, the exciting thing about it is that, we feel we're only, just starting on that journey. So, the sky's the limit as to where we end up. And that's, wine sales and the commercial side of wine and all those sort of things aside, we can just really see that we're progressing nicely with the wines we're making and very passionate about the wines we're making. And, you get all that, it's a whole package, and that's been, really, really exciting for us. Yeah.
So when you kind of came back and said, yep, wine, this is what I want to do, what did you start doing to kind of move towards that goal?
Yeah, it was funny because I actually got home and I thought I'll help my parents with a vintage only, and then keep moving on and going and seeing some other things and work, in wine, but outside of the family business, I suppose. And got home and just saw how much of an opportunity was there and what could be done straight away and all those exciting prospects, and decided to stay on and be a part of what was really, has proved to be a great journey. And, Mum and Dad were well on the way already to making it a success story, and it was just complementing that and working within the family structure to sort of keep on doing it. So, it was sort of accidental in a way that I, ended up staying on, working full time in the business as early as I did. But it's been a great journey.
What led your parents to planting a vineyard here in the Frankland River? Yeah,
they, as I was saying before, Dad had, having grown up on vineyards, he had this passion for wine and was making a barrel of wine down at Goundries in Denmark, as I was saying, and he did a few little vintages around locally with a couple of small producers at the time. But it was a trip to France with Bill Hardy of Hardy Wines in the early 80s that really, I suppose, there was a lot of encouragement from, colleagues, well, now colleagues in the industry, but people in the industry then, to say, you'd grow grapes really well down there. And they started looking into it more and more after they returned from a trip to France and Bordeaux in particular. And got very excited by the prospect that, in fact, grapes could grow well here. And there was a bit of proof from a few small vineyards locally. And Harold, they found a report from Harold Olmo from 1956 saying that the banks of the Frankland River would be an ideal place for grape growing. So they planted, after a few more trips back to France and doing vintages and working over there, they decided in 88 that they'd plant vines. And that's how they sort of started.
And what kind of influenced the choices of particularly what kind of varieties to plant?
Yeah, Look, I don't think my father has no bones about saying that, the reason he planted Chardonnay was because the ag department at the time and everyone in the industry said we should plant Chardonnay.
I think everyone wanted to plant Chardonnay back in those days.
And it's been an amazing success story for Australia. But, I think we've evolved from that now, and Chardonnay, still finds a nice little home in our portfolio in a very small production. But, we've seen that Riesling does grow very well in the area. Shiraz as well, it's a cool climate. But, whilst Australia's had much success with bigger examples of Australian Shiraz, this is a very cool climate Shiraz, and is finding a really nice niche. And then my parents planted the Bordeaux varietals, so Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Malbec and Petit Verdot, just to see, their aim was to make a flagship red blend. And, today that's mostly Cabernet Franc with a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon and Malbec, Petit Verdot, less so Merlot. But, it's a ever-evolving thing, and we're now embarking on some new varietals and to see whether they work in the area. And I think, we've got to remember we are a new region, so, we've got to expect that there'll be some things we come across as the years go by, and to keep exploring, and that's, part of the excitement of grape growing.
So in talking with a number of people over in Margaret River earlier this week, and obviously this is it's not new for me, but I can imagine that the perception of Western Australia, it's an Australian perception in general, I guess, is that this is hot, dry, flat, whereas Great Southern in general, but particularly here in Frankland River, is anything but hot. It's this beautiful vineyard is not flat. Can you explain to people what's the climate here that makes it ideal for growing the cool climate varieties?
Yeah, I think Frankland River's quite special in that it's probably one of the furthest inland of the regions in Western Australia. So typically, vines are grown around the coast from Margaret River down to Albany, and there's a few regions inland and a couple further inland from us even, but typically we are considered as much continental, where a lot of those regions are very maritime influenced. So we get very cold nights and warm days during the growing season, but right through the year, very cold nights. And I think that really helps retain a lovely line of natural acidity and natural fruit freshness in the wines. And they're elegant wines, and I think it's taken us a few years to, I suppose, build the courage and know what wine styles we want to make and how we want to make them, to really celebrate that fact that they are a very unique style for Western Australia, but also for Australia, and celebrating that fact that we can produce wines with very little I suppose additions, or it's a very natural example, if you like, without wanting to pursue the meaning of the word natural. But I think it's very effortless to come up with some very elegant, stylish styles of wine, if that makes sense.
What about rainfall? Is it an area that gets much rainfall?
Yeah, I mean, it drops off quickly from the coast. So down at Denmark and Walpole, directly to the south of us, we get over a metre of rainfall, 1,100 mils. And as we're only sort of 60, 70 kilometres inland, and we already are at 700 millimetres, and then from us going further inland, it drops off even more. So it is finding those really nice little pockets, and the Great Southern generally, as a larger region, Our vineyards are very dispersed, if you like. There's just little vineyards with a fair bit of distance between them, and I think that highlights to me how clever you have to be to get the right mix of, rainfall, soil types, hillside, slope, all these little things that sort of accumulate to become, the package. And I think, the good vineyard sites are really going ahead, and I think, it's important to get, rainfall's a very critical part of that. But yeah, it's we're seeing, rainfall vary more so probably now in the last 10 years than we have historically, and climate change is certainly something that we're listening to. If you think about our vineyard practices today and what we're doing in the vineyard, it's changed quite significantly from what we were doing 10 and 15 years ago, and that's just listening to your vineyard and seeing what fruit's coming in and how it's coming in to adapt to change. And that's.
So do you think the working organic is helping a lot with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, our vineyard, Isolation Ridge Vineyard, is 90% dry grown. There's a couple of blocks of varietals that aren't. We do put a little bit of irrigation water on, but 90% of the vineyard is dry grown, and that's quite incredible. There's a lot of producers around us that don't do that, and I think the organics, it's a lot of what you're doing is about building soil structure and carbon levels and all the different things that allow for good, healthy vines. And if we get rainfall during the growing season, we celebrate it. We don't. A lot of people say, it's a risk for disease and things, but we get such high temperature variations, and disease is such a minimal thing that what we do enjoy is that extra little bit of rainfall. That just helps freshen the vines up and keeps them going, and we know we've got the soil structure to maintain a lot of that moisture for a good amount of time. So it's very important, I think.
Tell me a little bit about the soils.
Yeah, so the ironstone, what we call ironstone gravel, and the locals call coffee rock. It's red ironstone conglomerate, and that's that sits over loam and clay, and then clay, and that the iron in the soil, I suppose, means that the clay is quite red underneath as well, and it's a lateritic sort of soil, if you like. So basically, that's it's the ironstone gravel rock that sits up on top of the ridges, and that hasn't been washed away purely because of its heavy rock nature. So you get these ironstone ridges or hillsides, and typically the vineyards throughout the region are planted on top of those. People look for a little bit of elevation, and we're sitting 350 metres above sea level, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but Western Australia is, as you said earlier, a fairly flat place, and so this southwest corner of the state where you do get a little bit of elevation, it does go a long way in giving the vines a bit of a view, and capturing a bit of that nice wind to help decrease vine vigour a little, but also disease and all those sort of things. Hillsides are important, a little bit of elevation,
And since going full conversion across to organics, have you sort of found that the way you're making the wines has evolved a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Chardonnay is probably our classic example where, we've seen that wine in particular, and it's probably a true across all of our varietals, but I think Chardonnay stands out for me as being, we wanted to do individual barrel fermentations in their barrel on a wild yeast, and when we first were doing it, we were only getting a 20 to 30% uninoculated sort of strike rate in our barrels, and we're seeing that change now to absolutely 100% year in, year out of, as the juice warms up in its barrel, as soon as it gets to 10 degrees, we get nice strong fermentations just start. And, that tells me that we're seeing some really exciting evolution of healthy bacteria and healthy organisms right through our vineyard, and that that'll be coming in with our juices, with the grapes, and we're seeing much better ferments, better wines, more energetic wines, and so that changes the way you think about it. And we're fermenting more Riesling these days without inoculation, as with the red wines. But we're still very open-minded about it all, and we've started measuring the way our soil protozoas and all sorts of things to just make sure what we are seeing is actually there in science as well.
So Riesling is a very important part of the Frankland Estate story, and obviously Riesling is not necessarily associated with Western Australia the way Chardonnay and Cabernet is. Yeah. And obviously you've been working very hard to promote Riesling, but just Riesling as a variety. Yeah. And that was kind of, I'm assuming, the reason behind starting the Frankland Estate International Riesling tasting?
Yeah, it was. I mean, at the time, I think Riesling generally around Australia was copping a bit of a bad name, and Mum and Dad, I think, had 3 vintages of Riesling sort of in the shed and not knowing what to really do with it, because people just didn't understand what they were trying to do with, good dry Rieslings out of Western Australia. So, yeah, it was. I mean, we rallied some great colleagues from, around Australia and internationally, and started the Frankland Estate International Riesling tasting, and now that's evolved into Riesling Downunder, which is held every 3 years in either Melbourne or Sydney. And it's been a great platform to really bring some awareness to Riesling and what Riesling is today and not what it used to be. But throughout the Great Southern, there's some fantastic examples being made of fabulous Rieslings, dry mostly, some off-dry examples, but mostly dry, and they're delicious, very elegant styles of Riesling that have a real place in the Australian sort of wine scene.
Yeah, obviously, certainly in Melbourne, at least, you are represented by a company that obviously specialises in Riesling producers. They probably have one of the most enviable portfolios of German Riesling producers. And obviously, early this year, I spoke with Tom Barry from Jim Barry Wines and Clos Claire, and then whilst that tasting was running in Melbourne, I sat down with Johannes Hasselbach from Gunderloch. Yeah. But you've been able to put together a pretty amazing group of people that are really championing the Riesling variety. But you've also, in the past, had people like Jancis Robinson coming out and talking about the greatness of Riesling.
Yeah, I mean, we've been super lucky to work with people like Cellarhand, and they've been very passionate, as you say, about the Riesling story as well. And so we, working with those guys, Cellarhand have been a really important part of encouraging their great producers to come out to Australia and show a lot of Australians, in the trade and consumers, what is happening in the world of Riesling every 3 years. And so those guys have been great in supporting what we've been doing, and they continue to be exactly that. And yeah, look, I mean, I think everyone has a common goal, and when you get that all in one room, then you can, it seems only natural and quite easy to pick up the phone to people like Jancis Robinson and other, really significant wine commentators to come and help us celebrate. So, yeah, it's been a great, it's been a great ride.
And there's always excitement around the release of the single vineyard Rieslings, and I think there's some more exciting things happening here in Franklin River or Frankland Estate. Are you willing to talk about some of the exciting things you got planned?
Yeah, I mean it's just one of the, you just can't sit still, so it's always evolving for us. As we're talking about with the organics, we're starting to see things, better balances in wines, higher natural acidities. So there's a lot there that we can then bring into the winery and explore further. And the way we're making our wines, different times on lees, different fermentation vessels, all those sort of things. So we're really excited about the future. We've got a number of little Riesling projects going in-house. Whether they're all commercial reality or not, we'll wait and see. But certainly, the nature of the game is to keep evolving, keep exploring, and that's been good fun.
And last night over dinner, we very generously opened up a bottle of the 2003 Isolation Ridge, and as soon as I put that on Instagram, someone actually said, "Oh wow, I'd love to get an opportunity to taste some old Franklin Estate Riesling, but they're just so yummy when they're young. I drink them too quickly." So I think we kind of said, "Oh well, you just got to have to come up and and taste it here."
Yeah, exactly. We've kept a nice library, and we're probably a few years away still from, we've kept a good amount back of, I think it's 7 or 8 year old now. So we've got another couple of years before we do a 10-year release. And so, we're encouraging, just encouraging people to see how we're keeping it, I suppose, to show people how they really evolve, because I think it is, they're very unique in their own way. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think a lot of it is drunk too young and very young. So, hopefully we can prove to people that they do age very nicely for 10 and 20 years and more, and that the wines are very much worth seeking out and cellaring.
And have you got any events anywhere coming up that you'd like to kind of plug?
Well, we've actually got a round of wine dinners we want to do through each of our major capital cities, and so that's coming up, and those details we haven't quite finalised a few of them, but the details are on our website and will be expanded upon as we get a little closer. But they're looking like late August, that'll happen. And then, beyond that, we're still sort of recovering from Riesling Downunder. So, we do an annual flowering of the vine lunch down at the winery here, and that's always a good weekend to make the effort to come down and see us, because we get a couple of guest chefs from Perth, and we do a major tasting of a few Frankland Estate wines before we have a big lunch, sit down for a big long table lunch. So, but springtime's always a great time to see us, and that's in November, so come down and see us then. But yeah, always plenty going on, so keep an eye on the website.
So website's just franklinestate.com.au?
Yes, that's the one. Yep.
And what about on social media? How can people kind of keep in touch with you that way?
Twitter at Frankland Estate, and Instagram, Steph looks after. I can't remember exactly what the Instagram is, but
it's Frankland Estate.
Yeah, is it? There you go. And Facebook, and we're pretty. We're not all over our social media, but we do try to keep it pretty updated. So yeah, keep in touch with us that way. It's great.
But obviously, thank you very much for making some time with me and listeners. If you did enjoy this episode, you've got those social media outlets to thank Hunter for his time, and obviously thank him for his wine.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And again, great of you to come down and see us at Frankland Estate. So yeah,
it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, and hopefully again soon.
Thanks, Hunter.
Cheers.
And as always, guys, thank you very much for listening to another episode of the Vincast. I have been James Skersbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Intrepid Wino, and you can follow the podcast on Twitter at the Vincast. You'll find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Intrepid Wino. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll find me at Intrepid Wino. But always come to intrepidwino.com to find out the latest and get every episode of the podcast and read my back catalogue of different articles and tasting notes and whatnot. Of course, I'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or Player FM. And if you do that, please do leave a rating and review. Let me know if you enjoy the podcast, if you'd like to hear from a particular person, or if you enjoyed a particular episode. If you enjoy some of the guests that I have on the podcast, do go to differentdrop.com, where you should be able to find some of their wines. And remember that your first purchase, make sure you are putting in Vincast Vino, the coupon, to get $25 off your first order over $100. So my question for this week is, who is your favourite Western Australian wine producer? Obviously, I've had a couple of guests on recently, and there's going to be another one in a few weeks. So I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hashtag #AskTheWino if you'd like to hear me answer your question on the podcast. But until next time, bye.